So in this video, we're going to talk about the gas laws and especially this video is about the idea of how to not memorize the formula for Boyle's law or even Charles' law, even Avogadro's law. How do we not memorize it? Okay. And so the idea is typically you need to look at the problem and see which two quantities are given. So in this case, let's look at this problem. So if a gas has an initial volume of 2.75 liters and the pressure of 1.02 atm, okay, and the volume is increased. Well, I'm not even going to read the problem anymore. I just want to look at the idea that pressure and volume is given, okay? Now, obviously, we need to read the problem to see what we're solving for. In this case, it looks as if we're solving for P2. So we're solving for a new pressure, okay? But how do we come up with the formula without memorizing it? Well, the only formula that you should memorize is the idea that PV is equal to nRT, okay? And here's the gist. If the two quantities that are in the problem are on the same side of this equation in this form, then you could drop everything and say P1 V1 is equal to P2 V2. In this case, it's already given, okay? So because we're dealing with pressure and volume, look, they're on the same side of the equation, and so we could say P1 V1 is equal to P2 V2. Now, obviously, we're solving for P2, so we could say P2 is equal to P1 V1 divided by V2. And then this simply becomes a plug and chug question. Okay. Now, if I look at the second one, now obviously it's not on an exam or stuff like that. It's not going to be obviously given as such an easy question like this, but most likely be given in the form of such nation, of such. Okay. But the idea is, well, look what I'm given. I'm given volume and temperature. Well, it looks as if I have V1, T2, V2. So I'm solving for T1 here, but again, I'm given volume and temperature. Okay, and so how do we do that? Well, if I know that PV is equal to N RT, I need to get volume. I need to get volume and temperature on the same side of the equation. Okay, and then the idea now becomes I could drop everything and say, V2, V1, T1 is equal to V2, T2, okay? So how do we go about manipulating the equation using algebra? Well, if I'm solving for volume and temperature, okay, it looks to me that if I divide by pressure on both sides, that will cancel out my volume, my pressure, and so my volume is going to be equal to nRT divided by P. And then it looks to me as if I multiply by 1 over T on both sides, okay, well, notice that I have T on the top, T on the bottom. They're being multiplied, so those will cancel. Okay, and notice that 1 over anything is just 1 over it. So this will just simplify to V over T. So therefore, in this case, we're going to get V over T to be equal to NR divided by P. In this case, notice that we get the volume and the temperature on the same side of the equation. So with that being said, I could drop everything. And so here's a rationale. V1 T1 is equal to V2 T2. And this is the formula that we would use. Now, obviously, we're solving for T1. And so we could do a little bit of manipulation here. Okay, we can multiply by T2 on the same side. So let's do it. So if I multiply by T2 on the same side, on both sides of the equation, I'm just going to go up a little bit here. Then I get T2 V1 divided by T1 to be equal to V2. Okay. And obviously notice that I'm solving for T1. And so if I multiply by T1 on both sides, I'm sorry guys, I don't have enough space here, but hopefully you could see where I'm going. Then T1 and T1 will cancel out. And so notice that I'm left with T1 V2 is going to be multiplied by T2 V1. Okay, and so if I'm solving for T1, the only thing you need for me to do is just divide by V2. And so in this case, T1 is going to be equal to T2 V1 divided by V2. So this would be the formula that we'll actually use to plug in. Okay. But the idea is, this is the major part. How do we go from PV is equal to nRT to V over T to V over T is equal to NR, and then by that case we could just drop everything. Okay. Now what about this one? Well, this is Avogadro's law. And again, how do we not memorize it? Notice that we're given moles and volume. And so how do we solve for that in the equation? Well, if I look at this, PV is equal to nRT. We're given the 2 moles. It looks as if we're not given V2 here, okay? And so we need volume and moles to be on the same side of the equation. So how do we do that? Well, if I divide by pressure again on both sides, my volume is going to be equal to nRT over P. And since I'm looking to put N and volume on both sides, if I multiply by 1 over N on both sides, okay, if I multiply by 1 over N on both sides, notice that they're being multiplied, so N and N will cancel out, and so I get V over N is equal to RT divided by P. Well, notice that volume and the number of moles are on the same side. That means that I could just drop everything else. So in this case, I'm going to say V1 N1 is equal to V2 N2. And this is the equation we will use to look. It looks as if we're solving for V2 here. So the only thing left for me to just multiply by N2 on both sides, and that will just isolate V2. Okay, but this is the form that we need to be able to get to. So again, without memorizing these forms, you can see that we just derive it from the idea of PV is equal to nRT.